Hey everybody, we ready to read? Let's read chapter 5 and 6 of the Rhino in Right Field. Chapter 5. Come on now, Nick. Miss Demetriopoulos was hanging over my shoulder in a cloud of old lady perfume. You remember your Greek alphabet, don't you? Sound out the letters. I chewed my pencil and stared at the blank worksheet on my desk. I'd been speaking Greek all my life, but on paper it was hard. For one thing, the Greek alphabet has only 24 letters, and they all look like meaningless squiggles. What the heck happened to 2 whole letters? I was never a good speller to begin with, and now I was supposed to do it using squiggles and without 2 of the letters? Plus, I was sleepy and hungry. It's the same thing every Tuesday. Spend the whole day in school, stop home for a snack, and then take the streetcar to Greek school. Sit in the church basement for 2 hours with the priest's wife telling you to sound out the letters, as if that's all there is to it. And when it's finally done, ride the streetcar home again in the dark. Choke down your cold supper so that you can start on your regular homework. Did anyone ask me if I wanted to go to Greek school? No. Right now, all the other kids were bent over their own papers. Most of them had stickily looks on their faces, which would have been funny, except for my own face probably looked the same. A few kids, mostly girls, were breezing right along, just like in regular school. Could I help it if I liked numbers better? Batting averages, ERAs, win-loss records, important, real-world stuff. I scrawled my name in Greek at the top of my paper. At least I remembered that much. It was enough to make Mrs. D decide to go torture someone else. I couldn't stop thinking about Joe Daggett, the new owner of the Mud Puppies, and me and Ace spouting off about how awful the pups were. But Joe Daggett had given me an official Mud Puppies baseball, so he couldn't have been too mad. Could he? I felt a poke between my shoulder blades. It was Pete holding out a crumbled scrap of paper. You remember Pete. Me and him went way back. And let's just say we weren't exactly best friends. In fact, we hated each other's guts. Sure, we played baseball together. You do what you gotta do to keep a scrambled team going. And we lived 4 blocks apart. But other than that, we didn't have that much in common, except being Greek. So even though he was a show-off and a big mouth and a knucklehead who had beat me up at least once a week from kindergarten till 2nd grade, me and Pete were stuck going to Greek school together. I grabbed the scrap of paper and turned around again, dropping my hand in my lap in case Mrs. D noticed. When the coast was clear, I peeked at the paper. It said, number 6, ? I turned and gave him the puzzled look. Question number 6? Hissed Pete, leaning across his desk and shooting a glance toward Miss D. What's the answer? I should mention here that probably the only reason Pete passed 2nd grade was because he copied off me for most of that year. But things had changed since 2nd grade. I don't know, I whispered back. Something about buying squash at the market? Squash? He looked down at his paper and scratched his head. I thought it said watermelon. I don't know, Pete, I answered. Do it yourself. He snatched the note back. Wait until the next time you're in right field, he muttered. I'm gonna clobber that ball over the fence again. I knew it! Did I mention that I hated Pete's guts? Boys, called Mrs. D from the front of the room, do your own work, please. I turned around, but after a few seconds, I got another poke in the back and another note. Number 8, ? I couldn't help it. I turned around and said, cut it out, Pete! Boys! It could have been worse. We could have been hauled off to see the priest who would have told our folks, who would have given me all sorts of grief. I could hear them now. How could you embarrass us like that? Don't you know how hard the poor woman works to teach you something? You should be proud of your heritage. Instead, you act like hooligans and goat herders. Never mind that back in Greece, our family had been goat herders. And besides, what did it have to do with being a hooligan? But I knew that wasn't the point. It was the embarrassment part. Instead, we got extra homework. As we rode the streetcar home, Pete said, "Let's do it together." He really meant, "Let me copy off you." "Sorry," I said, even though I wasn't. I held my worksheet next to Pete's. "They're different assignments." "What?" Pete slouched on the seat. "That Mrs. D sure is sneaky. My folks won't help me either." I folded my worksheet and slammed it into my back pocket. I might be able to get my ma to help me. That way she can learn to read English at the same time. "Your ma can't read English?" "Not too well," I said. "She didn't come to the States until she was 16. She never went to American school." This is what I meant about being Greek. I couldn't admit that kind of thing to just anyone, not even to Ace. But Pete's folks were born in Greece too, so he knows what it's like. He just said, "What happens when you bring a note home from school? Like when you get in trouble and stuff." I shrugged. Sure, I got in trouble at school sometimes, but nothing big. Talking in class, forgetting my homework, not exactly Pete caliber trouble. "I read 'em to my ma," I said. "What else?" "She never exactly punished me anyways. Usually she just made me promise to try harder." "Holy moly!" Pete pulled the signal cord. "You got a lot of guts. My mom never sees the notes I bring home." The streetcar squealed to a stop and we hopped off. "I don't get it," I said as we started to walk down the sidewalk. "How do you get her to sign a note she never sees?" Pete clapped me on the back. "You gotta learn, pal. I've been forging my mom's signature since 3rd grade. Chapter 6. After school the next day, Ace was waiting for me in our usual spot at the edge of the playground. "What's the score?" I asked him as we pushed our way through the crowds of kids on our way home from school. We were headed to the zoo to pick up the scramble game where the guys had left off the day before. I'd missed yesterday on account of Greek school. "We're ahead 9-7, Ace told me as we walked down the sidewalks. "And no run-ins with Tank." That's because Pete wasn't there. If he hits the ball over the fence again, he can get it himself. Let's see how he likes Tank breathing down his neck. "At least now we have another baseball," said Ace. "Good old Joe Daggett. The fellas still don't believe me that we met the Mud Puppy's owner. They'd think you bought that ball." I laughed. "Where would I get 98 cents for a new baseball? That's 3 weeks worth of tip money." We got our mitts and started playing catch as we walked down the sidewalk. Whenever we passed a group of kids, we tossed the ball over their heads. This might sound like trouble, but we do it all the time, and we hardly ever hit anyone. Right now, we were headed around a passel of 5th grade girls. So Ace went wide and I went wide right. I tossed the ball up and over the girls in a perfect arc. Ace reached for it with his glove, and a hand shot up from the middle of the herd of girls and grabbed the ball out of mid-air. The girls squealed and scattered, leaving one girl standing alone on the sidewalk. She was taller than the others, with scuffed saddle shoes and a huge cloud of black hair. One hand rested a stack of books on her hip, and the other hand was holding my baseball. She stared at me and chomped her gum. "Hey," I held out my hand. "That's mine." She squinted at me. She blew a bubble. She was taller than me. I hate that. She did not hand me back my ball. She just set down her books and said, "Go long." Huh? But she couldn't say anything else. She looked up the street. She looked down the street. She watched a coal truck rumble past. And then she wound up like she was Joe DiMaggio in center field. "Go long," yelled Ace as we both realized what was happening. We took off across the street just as she heaved the ball high in the air. I went charging after it, almost tripping over the curb, and plowed through a bunch of kindergartners like they were bowling pins. Little kids were crying, bigger kids were hollering, and that ball came whistling down from the sky like a comet. What did I do? I froze. Because, as you might recall, I can't catch a fly ball to save my life. There I was, chasing after a ball thrown by a girl, and everyone was watching me, and I was going to miss it. And sure enough, it went sailing over my head. My brand new official Mud Puppies baseball headed for the storm sewer and Lake Michigan. Thunk! Got it! I whirled around. It was Ace, right behind me, with his mitt in the air and the ball in his mitt. The kindergartners all stopped crying and gave him a round of applause. In fact, so many kids were gathering around Ace on one side of the street and all around that tall girl on the other side. No one seemed to notice my pathetic performance, which was fine by me. "Did you see the arm on that girl?" I overheard one kid saying. "I seen both her arms," said another kid. "Long and hairy. Did she escape from the monkey house at the zoo or what?" I looked across the street at the tall girl. She did have a lot of hair. There was some kind of ribbon tied around her head, but it wasn't doing much to hold things back, and her arms were long, but so were her legs, and all of the rest of her. She didn't seem like a person who needed someone else to stick up for her, and she hadn't exactly done me any favors by humiliating me in front of everybody with my baseball, no less. But that wasn't the point. The point was, making fun of a person because they can't catch a ball thrown by a girl is one thing, but a person can't do anything about the lengths of their arms. I searched around for the kid who'd made the crack about monkeys. There he was. Some scrawny fifth grader with an expression that made you wonder if he ate nothing but pickles. "Hey, kid," I told him, "pick on someone your own size, why don't ya?" "Oh, right, you can't, 'cause there's no one else around you who's a rat." I grabbed my baseball out of Ace's glove and stalked away, leaving the kid standing there with his sourpuss mouth hanging open. Behind me, the kindergartners were laughing. All right, we'll catch you later.